Microphone. Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Anya. I'm the CTO of HairDAO, and today I'll be talking to you guys about one of my favorite topics, which is decentralized science. Now, at first glance, the two topics, crypto and science, might seem like they couldn't be, more disparate, but actually what we found is that a lot of the incentive alignment mechanisms of crypto, which allowed us to have this fair, transparent, more open financial system, are actually really powerful when you overlay them onto science. So in order to put this all into a little bit of context, what I'll be doing is taking you through some of the general issues we're facing at the moment within science and really highlight how it is that crypto incentives can tackle that. So to begin with, a statistic that is quite shocking, what we're finding is that 70% of science is actually not reproducible. So what that means in practice is that when researchers actually replicate or try to replicate other studies, most of the time it isn't giving the same results. Now this is a little bit problematic because science is really about, unraveling the truth, and the truth is both reproducible but also is objective. And so why is this the case? A big part of it comes down to misaligned incentives. So within academia, if you want to actually climb the academic career ladder, what you have to do is publish ever more papers and ever more journals. And what this has led to, unfortunately, is a lot of massaging of data and let's say, a mindset that really values novelty over truth. And then the other issue we're facing is of strict hierarchies. So you'll often have PIs which put into place a particular hypothesis, and everybody else in the lab will have to follow it. And a recent example of one of the kind of big pitfalls of this sort of organization is the Alzheimer's mafia. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but in the 1990s, a theory was put into place. This is called the beta amyloid plaque hypothesis, and it said, okay, this beta amyloid plaque buildup is what leads to Alzheimer's. All we have to do is clear it up, and if we do that, we get rid of Alzheimer's. Now, it's been over 30 years where we've been researching this hypothesis. A lot of people have refused to actually do their graduate studies in it just because you really can't research anything else. Now, it turns out this initial data for the study was actually fraudulent, but because most of the funding goes to the same institutions and the same professors at these institutions, they really put in place these paradigms which can't be questioned. And DeSci really changes that. It's a lot more Socratic. But this isn't a new problem. So Max Planck already, and I'm paraphrasing, had the saying that new scientific truths, they aren't really uncovered through rational debate, but rather by the death of one professor at a time. There's also Eroom's law. Most of you here in this room will know Moore's law, or this idea that every 2 years we have the doubling of transistors on chips. In science, what we're facing is the opposite. We call it Eroom's law. And we're actually having an increase exponentially in the price of developing new drugs, and it takes longer and longer to bring new drugs to market. So at the moment, we're at about a $3 billion price tag and 12 to 30 years to bring new drugs to market. And then finally, there's this question of resource allocation. This is perhaps not so much a problem, but more an ethical or philosophical point. What we're seeing is that most of the resources go into two primary conditions. Those are oncology, so cancer, and cardiovascular disease. And the reason for that is that, resource allocation by government is done in a utilitarian way. So most of the money goes to the conditions that most people suffer from. Not a bad way of resource allocation. However, you have a lot of other people and a lot of other diseases really fighting for scraps, and individuals with diseases falling through cracks. So the cool thing is you've had a lot of, let's say, grassroots organization now of different diseases actually forming DAOs to pool not just capital, financial capital, but also intellectual capital and experiential capital. So we have this for rare diseases, women's health, and the case study that I'm going to talk you through today is actually that of hair loss, so a DAO focused on hair loss. But to prove that this actually has some merit, here is one of the members of HairDAO about a year ago. He's at this point tried basically every hair loss drug on the market, both the gold standards, minoxidil finasteride, and even esoteric drugs. So a total actually of 7 different treatments, all to no avail. And he joined HairDAO, and he actually joined one of the proprietary treatment trials, which was developed by the drugs. And this is him 6 months later. Yeah, so really exciting results. But to put it into context, I was wondering if you in the audience were willing to raise your hand if you ever experienced hair loss or you know someone who's experienced hair loss. Yeah, so that's a lot of the audience, and it's really aligned with what we kind of see in the literature. So it's about 80% of men, but also 50% of women that experience hair loss over the course of their lives. And the psychological effects in many cases can be quite devastating. I have some excerpts from our Discord, but also more mainstream publication like The Economist's 1843, which really detail actually some of the devastating side effects that people are willing to put up with to regrow their hair on treatments like finasteride. So why, again, do we have this issue? And as so often, it comes down to incentive alignment issues. So on the early stage, it's not classified as a disease, as I mentioned, doesn't get any early stage funding at all from the government. And on the later stage, this one's a little bit confusing at first, but it's like, why does pharma not invest into hair loss? And again, because it's not classified as a disease, you can't benefit, or pharma can't benefit from these reimbursement structures from insurance. So it's just not large enough of a market, surprisingly, for pharma to invest in. And what it's really led to is this big vacuum in funding. And actually, a DAO came together to tackle this. But what it has led to until now, until today, is this issue around having inadequate solutions. So the treatments that are available, those are both actually were discovered by chance, so growing hair was just a lucky side effect. But there's minoxidil, for instance. This is the gold standard. This doesn't work in 30 to 60% of patients, depending on what paper you look at. There's finasteride. This works a little bit better, but women can't take it, and it comes with really, really nasty side effects in a sizable portion of the population. So we're talking infertility, we're talking erectile dysfunction, we're talking severe depression. And we have community members who have struggled with this, and there's actually something called post-finasteride syndrome. So even after stopping taking the medication, they still, in some cases, struggle with this. And one of our community members, he actually quit his job and had to move back home because he had to combat kind of the symptoms that come with post-finasteride syndrome. There's also hair transplants. These do not work for every type of hair loss, and they're very expensive. So in the US, they're around $15,000 a pop. In Turkey, people tell me they're cheaper, around $3,000, but still, it's quite expensive, and the problem is they don't last you a lifetime. So you only have so many kind of donor hairs in the back to put to the front, so it's really not a long-term solution either. And this is kind of the cool part. So where does crypto come in? Where do these incentives come in? And the reason I urge everyone to listen here in particular is that if you know someone who struggles with something that there isn't a solution for, really it all starts out with just bringing together that patient community. In our case, it's a patient community of 3,000 individuals who struggle with hair loss and spend day and night thinking about it. If you're not working, they're basically on the Discord sharing new papers that have been published, summarizing them, coming up with new research ideas. And for all of this engagement, you basically are awarded the hair token. And what people will do is propose new research areas or drugs to commercialize. And then that hair token is actually used to vote on, okay, what do we fund, what do we not? And the nice thing there in terms of incentive alignment is if you spend all your time on Discord trying to, come up with solutions for hair loss, you really, really want your hair back. So you're incentivized to vote for what works. And you see that done in like a very Socratic way. I did my graduate studies at Harvard, and the people there were nowhere near to as passionate, and they really didn't care as much about the science and about solving whatever issue they were facing as they do here. So there's something about actually being impacted by a condition that just means you show up differently because you actually want to solve it. And so if people use the tokens to vote on a particular treatment being studied further, what you see is that it will be taken to the lab. And there we test these compounds, see, okay, does this actually regrow hair? Does it not? If it does, it becomes part of our IP portfolio. The tokens that people earn actually mean that they also earn and get to govern the IP. And because the entire process is transparent, the cool thing is that you have these community members that have been there from start to finish. They know the preclinical data, they know all the side effects, they can see the data. And they actually oftentimes will decide, actually, I want to join this treatment and this trial. Particularly for repurposed drugs, we already have FDA approval, and we know the safety profile, so it's really about efficacy. And if we have safety and efficacy established, it goes to the telehealth. We actually have our telehealth where we sell these products, and then the money gets reinvested into this flywheel. So it's really about optimizing the whole process and finding something that hopefully cures hair loss in the long run. So what are some examples of the type of research we do? That first picture I showed you of the regrowth, that was research that we found by Dr. Ralph Paus, who is the most highly cited hair loss researcher, and we collaborated with him actually to commercialize this drug. And what we saw was an average of 42.5 hairs per square centimeter, which is about double the gold standard. And we already know kind of the safety data. So we had multiple trial participants and no side effects. A different type of community ideated research is where in this case, one of our community members, Herbert, decided that actually one of the things we really want to focus on is optimizing the delivery vehicle. So when we have these treatments, make sure we bring the treatment directly to the hair follicle and not have it go systemic so we don't have all of these nasty side effects. We also actually recently opened our own lab, so we're testing over 100 different gene targets that the community has decided are interesting, and we repurpose FDA-approved drugs. Reason being, or the way we do that first, is we have the gene regulatory networks that we construct for both a healthy follicle and a balding follicle. And when we have these networks, you can actually see, okay, which FDA-approved drugs can shift that back. And then we test that out on actual human hair follicles in the lab. And the cool thing is something that these hair follicles, a lot of our academic partners, they don't have enough, so there's a supply chain issue there, but we actually managed to open our own tissue bank to solve this. I talked in the beginning about Moore's Law and Evrum's Law. To develop a new drug, if you're going to repurpose it, is about $300 million. We developed this new treatment for $140,000. So that's a 2,000-fold increase in efficiency and 2,000-fold drop in price. Also, it took 1.5 years from beginning to end to bring this to market. So these are the sorts of numbers where if you find patient communities who suffer from the same thing as you do, you actually can pool that amount of capital together to make it happen. We sell these drugs on our telehealth, as I mentioned, and all the money is basically reinvested into that whole patient ecosystem. The cool thing that this really shows me is that we're kind of entering this new era of healthcare where patients are now at the center. So we no longer have all this stuff coming from top down, but it's really bottoms up innovation. So DeSci. I hope I convinced you today with this case study that DeSci can do several things. Firstly, by actually getting the patients who suffer together and having these crypto incentive models, we can solve the reproducibility crisis, or tackle it at least, because people are really incentivized to find a solution that works in curing. We can reverse Evrum's law. It no longer costs us billions of dollars to develop a new drug, but in our case, 100,000, and in other DAO's cases, similar price tags to actually come up with new treatment. And finally, we're no longer dependent on the government actually allocating resources to the particular condition we're suffering from, but rather if we're suffering from something that's overlooked or underfunded, we can come together as patient communities to actually make a difference. So ultimately, I hope I convinced you that DeSci is the solution for the many and the few. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Okay, wait.
Yeah.
Wait. Can you repeat the question? So both U.S. pharmaceutical companies and crypto communities, I think, have PR issues. How do you get people outside of the direct DAO involvement?
Yeah.
How do you convince them to actually trust your drugs?
It's so there's kind of multiple stages. For one, we're completely transparent. So unlike the pharmaceutical industry, which oftentimes does not share clinical data or preclinical data, we share everything. So we're completely open. You can see, is this actually leading to hair growth? Who has tried it? What's the data? But also at the moment, our biggest focus is repurposed drugs, which means we already have information in terms of the safety profiles because they're FDA approved. So you know pretty much what the side effect profile is. In our case, we're using T3 at 1 1,000th of the dosage that usually, it's a topical thyroid hormone that people usually take. So it's, we haven't had any issues there. It's also been quite interesting speaking to a lot of academics, like how do you convince them? And what we found is actually just speaking to them. So even Ralph Paus, this researcher who's very highly cited, he said it's quite fascinating that these patient communities really know more than a lot of dermatologists. So it's actually through conversation that people see just how much knowledge there actually is in these communities.
Oh, thank you. That was
Of
useful.
course. Thank you.
Thanks for the talk. One of the things I find very interesting in DeSci is the IP ownership model. I think like the likes of Molecule DAO introduced.
Yeah.
Is that something that you guys apply in HairDAO?
Yeah, so all our first treatment actually was an IP NFT, but generally our whole ethos is that everything is community owned. So we have no kind of equity structure outside of the token. So
it's the hair token.
It's the hair token, yeah. Exactly. Cool. Thank you, guys.